Awesome. So thanks, Leighton, for the introduction. As Leighton mentioned, I'm PJ McGrew. I'm with the Governor's Workforce Cabinet. Really, we serve as the overarching entity that kind of tries to connect everything that we're doing at the agency level from the state. We serve as the state workforce board. I know the Region 2 workforce board has been talked about quite a bit today. We serve in that role from the state, but a little bit more than that in trying to bring everybody together, creating that alignment. I think from that state perspective, we were created in 2018, shortly after the governor created the Office of Work-Based Learning and Apprenticeship. We sat underneath the Department of Workforce Development for a number of years before the governor really saw the opportunity to bring us all together and move us under the governor's office. I served as the governor's education policy director. It was mentioned graduation pathways earlier today, when he really led that effort in 2017 to move us away from a one-size-fits-all standardized test that was being utilized for graduation into the graduation pathways model, where we were really looking at what diploma requirements are important, what type of employability skills do students need before they graduate, and then what type of post-secondary readiness do students need to demonstrate in order to be able to graduate. So really excited about where that's going and how far we've come in that effort. The class of 2023 will be the first graduating cohort that will have to go through those graduation pathways. And we really see apprenticeship opportunities, a revitalized career and tech ed space really being something that can help provide students with better experiences while they're in high school, so they're ready to move right into the workforce, cut down their time in a registered apprenticeship program, or make an easier transition on into post-secondary education and training moving forward. So real excited for the panel today to hear from other state agency leaders from the Commission of Higher Education. I have Josh Garrison. So Josh is an associate commissioner there. I'll be able to talk through a little bit about what's happening at CHE as we move forward on these efforts. Bringing back Darrell Zeck. So Darrell spoke earlier. He's the executive director of the Office of Work-Based Learning and Apprenticeship. We'll talk a little bit about things from, I think, two perspectives, Department of Workforce Development, and then also Darrell and in the youth space been working a little bit more collaboratively with the governor's workforce cabinet to embed those programs within our career and tech ed space. And then we have Karrah Herring joining us. She is the Chief Equity in, hold on, Karrah, I always get it wrong. Chief Equity, Inclusion, and Opportunity Officer for the state of Indiana. So real excited to have Karrah here. She is from the region, so real excited about that. And she can talk through everything that she's been doing. I know she presented at the last governor's workforce cabinet meeting and really kind of highlighted that she's done about 11 years worth of work in about 11 months as being on board with the state. So I'm happy to have our panelists with me today here. So first, we're just going to kind of go through and ask for an agency description from each of you. Give a little bit of an introduction yourself, what your role is, and then what your agency is working on kind of in this space. So Josh, we'll go ahead and start with you.
All right. Thank you, PJ, and bear with me. This is my first panel discussion since pre-COVID, so I might be a little bit rusty as we start off here. Again, my name is Josh Garrison. I'm an associate commissioner with the Indiana Commission for Higher Education. I oversee our policy and legislation as well as our state financial aid programs. And many of you may have heard of the Commission for Higher Education, but you may not know what we do. What we are is it's a 45-member agency, so we have 45 employees that report to a 12-person board. And the board has representatives from all of the congressional districts of Indiana, made up of business leaders and community leaders across the state, as well as 3 or 4 at-large members, a student member, and a faculty member. So what we do at the commission is we coordinate our system of higher education. We do not run any institutions directly. That's done by each of them having their own board of trustees. The main tasks that we do are degree program approval. So if there's a new degree an institution wants to offer, they need to come through us. We make recommendations to the General Assembly about higher education budgets and capital requests. And we also oversee Indiana's state student financial aid programs, such as the 21st Century Scholarship or the Workforce Ready Grant, which you may be familiar. PJ, what was the other question within that?
I think you're good we'll get to some of this other stuff here in a little bit. Darrell, you've already kind of described the Office of Work-Based Learning and Apprenticeship when you were up here early. You want to talk a little bit about DWD's role in all of this?
Sure. The Department of Workforce Development, our leader there is Commissioner Fred Payne. And I think something earlier too that I need to say, because I was kind of having fun with being from the government, right? Um, I think Governor Holcomb's done an awesome job with really putting key people into place that have some great industry experience now. So you're not seeing folks maybe that have been in a government position for 30 years actually occupying this space. So Fred Payne came out of industry, manufacturing in particular. I think pretty much every one of us up here can say, hey, we've come out of industry one way or another. So Commissioner Payne kind of leading the way. There's currently three pillars to the Department of Workforce Development. Uh, Mine being the third right now with the Office of Work-Based Learning and Apprenticeship, having been kind of placed there, built up from there back in 2018, but also unemployment insurance. That's where most people kind of go to when they think about DWD, or even our workforce boards, with Work One offices. Oh, well, that's the unemployment place, right? So much more than that, as most of us know. And even with UI, and they've had their work cut out for them the last year and a half plus, right? With the pandemic, hats off to them. They've run a super show over there. The other one then is workforce operations, and workforce operations is there primarily. They work through the workforce boards actually to provide a whole host of services and funding as well. So when we're talking about adult ed, uh, certainly through DWD that way, and the other workforce ops, I guess.
Yeah.
I would say.
Awesome.
Is that good?
For now, yeah.
Hey,
I think so.
I'm substitute.
I know.
So
and then Karrah, if you want to describe a little bit, it's been a little over a year ago now, I think, since the governor has created your position and you coming into that role. So very excited about that. One of the few states across the country that actually have a cabinet level agency head that is in charge of looking at equity and inclusion. So if you want to go ahead and describe a little bit of your role.
Thank you. Well, hello. I'm from South Bend, so it's nice to be close to home. Thank you, Leighton, for inviting me. The governor created this office along with some folks like Fred Payne from the cabinet about a year ago, and I started in February. And my charge was basically threefold, and I have to kind of explain this because the office isn't yet codified into statute, and so we're operating under private foundation dollars intentionally until we can show the return on investment of this work, and then we'll try to get this codified into statute through legislation. But the first was just to create the structure. We've never had this office before in the state, so it was a very exciting but also very daunting experience coming into a blank slate, and did a lot of conversations. And I'm so glad you mentioned Commissioner Payne, because he was one of the first people I talked to that really helped me think through what the structure would look like. But since coming in, we've gone ahead, we've created that structure. It's an office of 5, so it's a small but mighty team. I have 2 deputy chief officers that are working with me on a number of things. I have a chief data and strategy officer, because it's very important that we're using data-driven methods to get to the outcomes that we want to see. And then we have an executive assistant / event planner that's helping us with quite a bit. But there's 2 focus areas for the office, and so I'm so blessed because I get to work with all of the state agencies in the state of Indiana as we make sure that equity is a through line of the work that all of us are doing. The first charge is really internal to our 30,000 workforce engagement, and that's to look at our recruiting efforts, our retention efforts, our promotional practices, where we're placing job postings, how are we going out into the communities that we want to recruit from across the nation to get the top talent here to the state. And so keeping an equity lens on that work, and then also looking at workplace culture within state government. I was with the Indiana State Museum this morning doing our next level teams training, which really looks at civility and compassionate listening and constructive disagreement so that we can champion diversity. That's the first bucket. The second bucket is where I really get to work with these state agencies to look at inequities and gaps that exist across the state. And so a big focus for us over the course of the next year is something that I talked about in the governor's workforce cabinet meeting not too long ago, but we're going to be putting out these regional equity reports that will help us look at the biggest equity gaps by region across the state. And I'm working with a consulting firm called KSM, a gentleman by the name of Mark Caswell and his team, to really highlight the disparities and equities we see in workforce, we see in education, in health related to infant and maternal mortality. And then we're also really focused on economic development. So we'll be working very closely with the Indiana Economic Development Corporation on driving diverse entrepreneurship for women, people of color, veterans, individuals with disabilities, and then looking at access to capital and equity impact funding. So it's a lot of work. I have a tiny team and we are very focused on trying to get a lot of this done. But the key to all of this work is making sure that we show the ROI of the office so that by the time the next legislative session rolls around, we'll be ready to advocate for getting this office codified into statute. So we always have somebody there with an equity lens on the work. So I'm very excited that the governor asked me to lead this, and we are busy.
Yes, certainly. So, Karrah, I'm going to stay with you for this next question, because you mentioned some of these equity gaps and regional work that you guys are going to be developing. And as we look at some specific data measurements, have you started to identify what things we're actually going to look at and begin tracking in terms of how we're looking at our workforce through an equity lens?
Yes, I was in a meeting on yesterday with Governor Holcomb and Dr. Sean Huddleston from Martin University. And one of the things that we're going to be partnering with Martin University on is called an indexing initiative with some of our anchor institutions across the state. And this is really all through partnerships and relationships. And so I will tell people the first 6 months, I was on a bit of a roadshow, just meeting with VPs and CEOs, CFOs, college university presidents, and whatnot, just to learn the DNA of what their challenges are with equity so that we could see how we as a state could best support them. And one of the things that keeps coming up, and it's coming up across industry, it's really looking at how we bring and attract diverse talent to the state and get that talent to be excited about living in Indiana. It's a tough challenge sometimes, not just because of the weather that we see up here, but we don't often have a lot of the things that a Chicago or an Atlanta or New York can offer in terms of the social activities. So we're working with some organizations on that. But the other challenge is really looking at how we're cultivating the talent within the organizations that already exist. And so Martin University has what's called the National Center for Race and Equity, I think, Race, Equity, and Inclusion. And what they're going to be doing is partnering with institutions across the state to see where their workforce gaps are, and then partnering with my office to help to set some goals for those states. Whether it's something like, I'll use Notre Dame as an example because I know the people at Notre Dame and we've worked with them a lot. But let's say that they want to start to diversify some of their leadership, and they're like, hey, Martin University, how can you help us? You have all the experts that work in this space. We don't necessarily want to bring in a whole team to reinvent the wheel. And so we'll be partnering with Martin to help organizations look at that. Because one of the things that I can tell you, when you start to look at the achievement gaps in education, when you start to look at the crime rates and the challenges within those communities where we're seeing shooting and violence happen, so much of this is tied to socioeconomics. And so if you can create opportunities for people to get into the workforce where they are skilled and shored up, and then now they're able to get homes or apartments or some type of housing they can feed their kids, you will start to see some of those other inequities that exist in education and in crime with recidivism and some of the things we see there, and in healthcare. Those things will shrink if we can get it right in the workforce area first. And so that's a big focus for us, and Governor Holcomb is all about it. There's something that we're going to be rolling out soon called the Alpha Mission, so be on the lookout for that. And it's really related to workforce, diversifying our workforce, strengthening our workforce, and then supporting our partners across the state on how the state can help with some of those initiatives, because we hold the data. We know a lot of what's going on in those regions. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, it's certainly exciting. I know one of the things when I first took over for the workforce cabinet back in 19 was, sitting down with all of our cabinet members. So we, at the time, we're a 21 member cabinet. Now we're up to, I think, about 26. The General Assembly seems to add one or two folks every year. But all of our employers that were part of the cabinet, as we were resetting our mission and vision, talked about the diversification of their workforce. And I know that's front of mind for a lot of employers, even dating back, 2-3 years ago now. So that work's very exciting, Karrah. Darrell, I know that earlier you talked about growing human capital and using apprenticeship to do that. And I think as we all look toward the recovery from COVID-19, we're all feeling a little bit of the labor force shortage. You want to talk a little bit about some things that DWD might be working on, or things that we're tracking from the DWD perspective, where I'm happy to continue to weigh in. I know you're subbing for Mike today. I can also, but I figure I'd go ahead and let you take first crack at it.
Yeah, a couple of things. Obviously, there's a labor force shortage for sure. Okay, When we start to look at labor force that's trained to meet employer needs, that's even less. And I think one of the goals of DWD and of the state is to drive upward that labor force participation rate. And we continue to look at programs on how we do that, right? Right now, and that obviously was an issue pre-pandemic. The pandemic has kind of just exacerbated that piece. For instance, we know now that we've got the 55 and older group that are retiring quite a bit faster than they were pre-pandemic. We know that females age 18 to 34 have definitely not re-entered the workforce at a pace that others have. So, when we really start to take a look at those numbers, and as you shared, I mean, the data is out there. It's a matter of how do we share that data? How do we really look at that data in order to drive what it is we do? If there's one thing that I can say that I've seen, heard, talked about, watched over the last 3 years within the state, it is data, data, data. So those pieces are out there. It's connecting them together to make more informed decisions about what we're doing. And if I can, I'll add into the equity piece as well. Extremely important at DWD. And about 3 years ago, the agency actually started working more deliberately with women-owned, minority-owned, and veteran-owned businesses to really learn from them and say, okay, how can we improve the outreach to not just those businesses, but to the individuals impacted there as well. So that's led within that 3 years, we've seen a 300% increase in the number of businesses that we're actually engaged with. We're going through that same piece right now to try and do that on the individual client level as well.
Yeah, no, I know last summer when we made about a little over $100 million investment using some CARES dollars in expansion of our next level jobs program, so our workforce ready grant, employer training grant, we set aside and dedicated money on the employer training grant for women, minority, and veteran-owned businesses, and really saw that increase there as a part of that. So I was really excited to see that and know that well before that, Fred and the team we're really getting at trying to drive up that participation. So that's great. A couple of things that Darrell mentioned on our labor force participation rate. We're right about 63% or so on our labor force participation rate compared to about 61% nationally. So we're doing better. I think we recognize we need to improve there, though, and try to bring back some of those folks that have fallen out of the labor force over the last year and a half or so through the pandemic. We have talked with the DWD team and the governor's office a little bit last Friday about setting a goal on bringing back about 30,000 of those working age Hoosiers that have fallen out of the labor force over the next couple of years to start reaching out to them and make some direct contact to figure out, one, why, and two, to kind of target them for specific education training programs to get them back in and jobs in areas that they might have lost, but they could take those skills and translate them to some higher wage opportunities that might be out there now. Josh, I think the commission maybe not necessarily have the same type of workforce challenges or dealing with the same workforce challenges day in and day out that DWD is working through or that Karrah might be hearing from particular employers out there. Could you talk a little bit? I know in CHE's strategic plan from, I think was approved in December of 2019, one of the overarching goals was to increase the career relevance within our programs of study at our statewide post-secondary institutions. We took that 100% career relevance goal that was a part of CHE's plan, included in the governor's workforce cabinet strategic plan as well. Have you guys learned, over the last, I know that COVID has impacted some things, any lessons over the last year and a half or so as you guys have worked with our post-secondary partners or students in the post-secondary space that we can glean and move from and improve on that regard?
Absolutely. Just to level set too, I think that it's important to understand that at the commission, when you hear higher education, we're not talking about just four-year degrees. We're talking about everything from a short-term certificate all the way to PhDs, apprenticeships, any sort of education and training beyond high school. So when we hear higher education, I think too often people immediately think that four-year pathway. I have talked about the four-year pathway, the least of all the pathways in my almost decade here with the commission. But as PJ said, our strategic plan has a goal of having 100% career relevance in our programs across the state, meaning that every individual in a degree program will have some sort of interaction with industry, with their sector, something that's going to prepare them for the field that they're going to enter into. To understand where we're at with that, we ended up sending out a survey to the institutions to try to level set last year. And what we received back, we used a fairly broad definition and received back almost 90% self-identified that they have some sort of career relevant activity embedded within their degree program. The next steps in that process is to understand what all those activities are and how they can what best practices are among them. So some programs may have a very high quality career relevant item versus something that may not be as strong. So we're going to be working with that. The key for us to be able to improve upon this is engaging with the employer community. We need the employers to let us know what are the experiences that an individual who's graduating in social work needs to have, or an individual who's graduating in engineering needs to have. So that direct tie is the next step of that. And then we also have to close the gap of the remaining 11% who identified that they do not have some sort of career relevant activity. So over the course of the next year, we'll be working on that and expanding that process.
And I think Josh brings up a really good point about higher education being much more than just traditional four-year degrees. I think that is one thing that we continue to try to communicate out as, Commissioner Lubbers from the Commission for Higher Ed chairs the governor's workforce cabinet. I deal with all of the day-to-day operations of the cabinet, really getting folks to recognize, look, it's really about right fit, right time, and getting that short-term credential that could stack on into something else. I think, the commission has been, invaluable as we've revitalized the state CTE programs over the last 2 years, and really working with us to really backward build from Ivy Tech associate degree programs, Vincennes associate degree programs, and then where we have transfer articulation agreements from Ivy Tech to Purdue or to IU, and looking at how do we have a seamless education system to be able to start in high school, might be able to transition into a registered apprenticeship program. Many of those that Darrell's team was working on, ability for a high school student to take what they've learned in the CTE space and cut down their registered apprenticeship by a year, or now with what we've done with CTE, cut down their time at Ivy Tech or Vincennes, cut that time down by a year, and really start to develop a 1+1+2 model for students while they're in high school to be able to make that transition a little bit easier, regardless of what they want to do post high school. So we're really excited for how all of this is really coming together. And I think it's important to recognize that, the CHE is not just working with our four-year institutions. Darrell, kind of moving to you, since you are kind of the guru here on registered apprenticeships. Wanted to hear from you on promises and challenges that you guys have seen over the last 2.5, 3 years as you've built out the Office of Work-Based Learning and trying to scale our registered apprenticeship programs.
Well, it's wide open.
It is.
Maybe that's helpful. I think challenges right now as we look at this, because I'm working with a particular grant that we have from the Department of Labor. And by the way, as we get this right and we kind of set up this system, I was asked earlier about envisioning what does this look like, and certainly working through the workforce boards. The previous administration had promised, lots of money for registered apprenticeship, and the current administration in the White House has promised even more money for that. And we hear from the Department of Labor, our friends there, that definitely that's coming. So I think as we work through this, some of it's been a bit of an issue. Again, working with the workforce boards, you've got to understand that they, again, and two's awesome. Have I said that enough, Greg? Working with the workforce boards, they for decades, they've been in a mindset of working through WIOA and doing business a certain way. We're asking them to do something very different now, and to actually go out and, instead of being mostly reactive to situations, we're asking them to look at proactive solutions, actual viable proactive solutions for workforce needs. that comes with some difficulties, right, in working through that. But I will say all 12 workforce boards have given good effort to this in certain places where there's really good partnerships. We're learning some best practices from that. So there's no doubt that what we're learning and seeing even here today in Region 2, we'll take that and help apply that throughout the other regions. Same thing from those regions to here. I will say, working through the grant right now, one of the key issues that, or obstacles that we've got to kind of overcome is people's commitment to something like this. And again, and I think that it has been, registered apprenticeship is a very big, complex, cumbersome thing, right? And it's truly not, but it's how do we go out there and really sell that, if you will, and manage that. So it's a problem with companies signing on to it. I think you kind of heard that earlier up here. And then it's also participants saying that, hey, I'm going to commit the next, X number of years of my life to doing this thing. But there again, it's how do we communicate this? How do we sell this? How do we market this? And it truly does take partnerships, because I think there's one thing that sometimes we're not good at from a government level is the marketing and sales piece. And we're working through that now to really make things better from an agency perspective. I will say that across the board, DWD working with CHE, working with DOE, really looking at how do we go after this and market these things in a much better way and more deliberate way together. So did I answer? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I think that was good.
Those are me.
Josh, kind of turning to you a little bit, knowing that the registered apprenticeship programs we've talked about today are late, kind of highlighted up here earlier. We have educational partners, Ivy Tech, Purdue, our state-wide institutions, and really thinking about the fact that there is this, in my opinion, this growing skepticism around higher education generally. What role can apprenticeship play in helping combat some of that narrative where I think it really exists around the relevancy of how an education connects to a career? And I know you guys are pushing on this from your 100% career relevant goal, but what role can apprenticeship play in helping with that?
Yeah, I think if you take, Darrell gave earlier some pretty good numbers about the high school pipeline, and just to speak to that on a smaller level, I look at it a little differently. So if you go to the high school down the road here, for every 100 students who are sitting in the classrooms right now, 13 of them will not graduate high school. Of the remaining 87, 51 of them will go on to some sort of post-secondary education or training. Of those 51, 35 will go to a traditional four-year program. So when you look at the pipeline of students that we have right now, we are missing a lot of individuals who aren't wanting to go that traditional route. They're not wanting to go what has been predominantly, or has taken up most of the oxygen in the room, at least, that route. The opportunity for short-term trainings and registered apprenticeships are a different pathway for those individuals who are skeptical of higher education, understandably, and around the cost, although we can have a broader discussion on that, on return on investment. But when it comes to that, apprenticeships play a key role, and work-based learning opportunities play a key role in grabbing that population that is not doing something after high school. And when you look at, if you go to the labor force participation rate, just as an example, when you look at those with a high school diploma or less, the participation rate in Indiana is around 55%. But when you look at those with a degree or credential, it's around 73%. And it goes up as we have some sort of education and training in between. So if we are to address the workforce pipeline, we need to make sure that students are aware of all of these opportunities and the ones that are best fit for each of them, knowing that the pathway that I took, or that somebody else took, or that their educator took, may not be the one for them. So I think this plays a key role in filling that gap.
Awesome. Thanks, Josh. Karrah, we talked about, in your role, really trying to highlight for folks that equity is not just looking at things through a race or gender lens. It really is looking at things with a socioeconomic perspective as well. And knowing that, with apprenticeships, you're pairing employment wage with that education and training. What role do you see a registered apprenticeship in kind of helping cut through some of the equity gaps that we are seeing right now?
Well, both of my co-panelists really hit on it, and I just want to, a lot of data was shared, and when you start to disaggregate that data, not only by race ethnicity, when you start to disaggregate that data by location, so geographic location within the state, there are a lot of our rural students that also don't necessarily see the four-year degree as that pipeline. And so being mindful of those differences in Indiana, and then really, and I want to go back to the marketing piece because you're right, I don't think we do the best job as state government of marketing what we have to offer and how that can impact quality of life. And so what I see as an opportunity here is to really take all of the great work that's happening across agencies, because so much of it is happening already with CHE and DOE and DWD and others. DOC even has some great stuff, the Department of Correction. We're like alphabet soup up here, but we have a lot of great things happening. And I think it's our job, especially out of my office with my Chief Data and Strategy Officer, is to really put that into a package to talk about that and get the right faces and folks in front of our students at the K through 12 level and their parents, so that they understand that maybe a four-year degree is intimidating to you because of the cost, or it's just not something that you want to do. I have a 16-year-old at home, and I have a law degree and a BA, and I believe heavily in education, but she doesn't want to go to a four-year college. She wants to do something different. She wants to start a business. And so I think it's our job to really highlight that pathway for them. And I think those apprenticeships are huge, because I think if we market them the right way, there is a whole subset of young folks that could really start to feel the pipeline of our workforce that we could tap into now. And I will tell you, a lot of the work that I'm doing, and Dr. Katie Jenner called me on my drive up here because she and I have been partnering a lot on this K through 12 stuff. So much of it is setting vision for our young people to understand what's out there. And it sounds very simple, and it's something that was simple to me because I come from a two-parent home that really, they valued education, they pushed that with us, but that's not happening just normal for a lot of students. Some students don't have somebody talking to them about this. And so I think the state can play a role in setting that vision and showing what the opportunities and resources are. And I think we'll start to see the numbers trend in a different direction when we do that. Do me a favor when you have a chance, go to in.gov/equity and look at our data disparity portal, because I talked about disaggregating the data. So when you have a moment, that was a project that my office and a number of agencies across the state worked with our management performance hub to get this data disparity portal rolled out. And the Department of Education and some others are going to be sending out some more data. But what we're working on now is really creating the narrative on what's there, what we can shift, what's within our power, our sphere of influence, what we can control, and then what we need partners like our employers and others to come alongside us to do to help. But check that data portal out when you get a chance to look at some of that disaggregated data. But I think they're critical.
Awesome.
Can I
Go
add
ahead,
to
Darrell.
that real
Yeah.
quick? I think two things. First of all, when you enter into a registered apprenticeship program, you've got an instant support team that comes with that, right? Very huge. And that's, so when we start talking about how do we help, higher ed in that case too, when we look at how or why maybe people are getting lost after their first year in college, being in a registered apprenticeship helps that. The other piece is the stackable credentials that we often find, certainly within our state earn and learns and registered apprenticeship. So it's not you're just doing this one thing and that's it. It doesn't lead anywhere. The credentials that are obtained in there are truly stackable, and you can continue to move on with that. We've got another registered apprenticeship program partner that we're helping right now, Purdue University, in their cybersecurity apprenticeship. That starts out with just a certificate and moves to associate degree. They even continue to help people that have got an associate's degree. You can get into the registered apprenticeship and complete a bachelor's degree and then even a master's degree. So again, it's not this one or the other thing. It is all absolutely together.
And look how the earning potential grows as you start
Each
to
time.
move through
That's
that
right.
with that support system. It's really powerful.
Yeah. So the question came up at our last panel on sustainability for some of these things, and I think the state puts forth resources for employers, individuals to access these types of opportunities. Joe, you want to talk a little bit about some of the funding mechanisms at DWD that might be able to help enable some of these programs grow and at least get the flywheel going to keep them
Yeah,
going?
so we've actually built both SEALs and registered apprenticeships that can take advantage of the employer training grant and even the workforce ready grant that's there. There's other funding through there that have supported the boards to actually help grow these programs as well. in addition to the U.S. Department of Labor grants that I talked about earlier, one thing that I did that was different, we had a grant that DWD had from the U.S. Department of Labor for apprenticeship expansion prior to the office being stood up. Once we kind of took over management of that about a year, year and a half after the office was stood up, one thing that I thought was interesting is how we actually did that. And we went through the typical RFP process and provided funding out. Very different outcomes out of something like that than what we're doing now. What I'm doing with any additional funding that we get from U.S. Department of Labor for apprenticeship expansion is pushing that out through the workforce boards. So they've got the funding, there's where the decision power is. They've got the public-private partnerships, the trust at the regional or local level that we don't often see from the state level. So I think it's not just supplying the funding, but how are we doing that and where are the decisions being made?
Yeah, so building off that a little bit, if you're not familiar with the Employer Training Grant, this is a program we stood up back in 2018 to really help employers offset some of their training costs. So it can be used for new hires or incumbent workers. If it's an incumbent worker, they need to see a wage gain. Want to commend Commissioner Payne, for when he came in, really helped streamline the process for employers to gain access to those Employer Training Grant funds. Real simple training plan submission reviewed by the DWD team. We're working more closely with our workforce boards to connect with employers on that. But any employer could access up to $50,000 to help offset some of those costs. We've partnered with over 3,000 employers thus far across the state in the 3 years we've had the program, and we've seen about 41,000 individuals go through some type of training with the Employer Training Grant to about a $4,100 or so a year wage gain that those employees are recognizing now. So pretty excited about that. Josh, Darrell talked a little bit about the Workforce Ready Grant. You want to talk a little bit about that, and then also potentially the Earn Indiana and how that could potentially be leveraged as well.
Yeah, the Workforce Ready Grant is the sister program to the Employer Training Grant under the Next Level Jobs umbrella. So if you went to the Next Level Jobs website, you would see this opportunity. And what it does is provides tuition-free and charge-free education and training in the 5 in-demand sectors here in the state of Indiana, 5 of the most in demand. I'm going to do my best to remember them off the top of my head. Business and IT services, building and construction, health and life sciences, advanced manufacturing, and then
Transportation.
IT, logistics. Yeah. It's been a little bit since I had to list those off. So it provides those training in those 5 areas, and there's around 100 different opportunities that individuals can take advantage of whenever they go in there. And it provides both traditional credit bearing through Ivy Tech, Vincennes, or other higher education institutions, as well as non-credit trainings as well. And these programs stack within on the credit bearing side within other degree programs. So if someone were just to go to the website and enter that in, an institution will contact them with the next steps for how to enroll. And it's not a need-based item, so I've referred relatives to this program and friends to this program who have taken up advantage of it, and we've had thousands of completions across the state. Additionally, if a registered apprenticeship were to embed one of those opportunities, there would be opportunity for the cost to be covered for a student in that pathway. So as you work with an institution on building the apprenticeship opportunities, that's something that I would look into as well, at least on the credit bearing side. And the other program that PJ mentioned was the Earn Indiana program. And so some of you who may have taken advantage of a work-study program at the federal level for if you were at a post-secondary institution, this is the state version of that. And what the Earn Indiana program does, it matches up to 50% of an intern's wage for an employer for an experiential-based internship. So it can't be somebody at your office making copies and getting coffee. It has to be somebody doing work that is relevant to their degree program, relevant to your business. And if you went to Work and Learn Indiana, that will connect you with that process. There are thousands of potential interns across the state. We are also now expanding that to the high school level, and there is an RFP out right now. EARN is a partnership between the Commission for Higher Education and the Indiana Chamber, to where we will be looking at expanding work-based learning opportunities at the high school level. So if you're from a K-12 school right now, I'd encourage you to look at that RFP opportunity to help fund these opportunities for your students who are involved in the graduation pathways.
Yeah, so the requirements for the EARN expansion are aligned with two programs. One that Josh mentioned, the Next Level Jobs program, so it has to be in one of the same sectors as our Workforce Ready grant. But then also I mentioned graduation pathways at the onset. The work-based learning component of graduation pathways requires a minimum 75-hour experience for students, and so the EARN high school expansion has to align to both of those things. As you mentioned, we, in partnership with the Chamber, released that RFP, I think 3 weeks ago now. And I know that we've gotten a lot of interest from schools on that. At least by my count on Friday and talking with the Chamber, at least 70 schools have already inquired about how they would apply for that. So pretty excited about that expansion off the success that we've seen for the post-secondary program over the last couple of years. So kind of lastly here, just wanted to talk through with you all just agency alignment, right? I mean, we've talked about a lot of different programs here. And my time with the state, which is similar to Josh, is coming up on a decade now. I've never seen us working in more coordination than we have. So just want to hear from you all about that work, why it's so important for us to come together to really kind of lead the charge as an example for how our regions can coordinate similar activity. Josh, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I concur with PJ that in my time at the state, I've not seen this level of coordination amongst the agencies. Whenever I arrived here in Indiana and started working for the state, there were definitely silos that you saw, that we were focused on what we were doing. And if somebody had a suggestion on what we were doing, it almost felt like somebody playing your sandbox. And that is no longer the case. We have regular meetings with other agencies. I'm in constant communication. PJ and I road tripped up here today together to this event.
How come
So
you guys didn't ask me if I needed a ride?
he texted me at 10 this
What's up
morning,
with
so
that?
sorry about that.
No, I'm staying over.
I was going to say,
Yeah,
I
I'm
figured you
in
were
South
staying up
Bend.
here.
So, and what we've seen is in just take next level jobs, the Workforce Ready grant is an example of that. That this is a program that started out on in its first iteration and the first idea behind it, a traditional credit hour degree program institution aspect. But through information from the Department of Workforce Development and others, it expanded to say, look, this can also help out on the non-credit side. So our other providers more on the WIOA side of things. So just items like that on the day-to-day. Working with the Indiana Career Explorer has been a multi-agency item. There are numerous ways that every day that we are interacting and hopefully streamlining and not duplicating work. I mean, the worst thing we can do a government is continually create the same thing at different locations. And by working together, we are stopping that duplication and improving the products.
Awesome. Darrell, I know you kind of straddle multiple worlds right now with working with the governor's workforce cabinet on the CTE youth side of work-based learning and all the work that DWD is doing to expand apprenticeships through the workforce boards and adult education. So how do you see us all kind of coming together to collaborate across the agencies?
And it's both, like you just said, within our own agency, even, right? Within DWD, finding those places where there's some of this work being done, similar or supportive work. And then across different agencies, of course, we're working on a special project now to try and advance some things here within the state, and that cuts across just about everybody. I think also, though, with our office, we looked at positions that I had, my regional directors. We find similar positions at like Ivy Tech, and Ivy Tech has campuses all over the place. I had regional directors all over the place. DWD had some similar roles there. So I think, yeah, the more that we talk, the most definitely we're learning and we're gaining the efficiencies and the effectiveness that we really should.
Yeah. And Karrah, you're new to this, and so you've been trying to talk to all of us to try to coordinate, streamline, figure
Yeah.
out what we're all working on? What are you seeing?
Well, I'll be honest with you. When you said that it wasn't like that previously, it was one of the things that I told Governor Holcomb in a cabinet meeting, that I was so impressed by the cross-agency collaboration, and people were so willing to share data with me, because my job is to look at this at a macro level and really think about the social determinants of health of our Hoosiers and how they're experiencing quality of life within the state. And in order to do that, I have to talk to the Department of Correction. I got to talk to FSSA and social services. I got to talk to the folks in workforce and DWD and CHE, all of those agencies. And people have been so willing to share data and to sit down and say, okay, we're already doing this. We don't need to reinvent the wheel here. This is how we can partner with you. They've been willing to share external resources and stakeholders that they engage with. And so I think it's so powerful to see this cross-agency, but also cross-industry collaboration, because at the end of the day, we are all here to serve Hoosiers. That's who we work for. We work for the people of Indiana. And so the better we operate as a team, as a unit within the State House and all of our other buildings that we have, the better we're able to serve Hoosiers and get us to solutions so that people's quality of life is improved. And I've been incredibly impressed with the collaboration, and so grateful that so many have welcomed me into the fold and provided my team with what we need to be successful. So I'm excited. I think this is just the beginning of something really amazing.
Yeah, fingers crossed. And I'm excited to see you all up here and the partnerships that you're able to establish. Now, I think the workforce board, the regional collaboration meeting on the comprehensive needs assessment was mentioned earlier, and we're just thankful and grateful that the boards were willing to do that, to bring together employers, South Bend Elkhart Regional Partnership, the workforce board from up here, CTE directors, to really start to think through where there is that cross entity overlap in that work, and think that you guys are primed and ready to go for great things up here. So with that, happy to open it up to questions from the audience. For I think we got about 10 minutes left or so.
Few online questions we can jump in with. First question, I know there are discrepancies in the definition of equity. How does the state define equity, and is it more of a quality or a broader concept?
Well, I think you're probably going to get different answers from each of us, but in the session that I was in this morning with all of our employees from the Indiana State Museum, the way that we're looking at this is just looking at rectifying disparities that exist between varying groups, right? Because equity and equality are very different things, and so equity is making up for those gaps, implementing initiatives, driving resources to areas where we see those gaps that exist so that we can hopefully close those equity gaps. And that's just rectifying the disparities that we see through the data. That's the simplest form that I can tell you. That's how we're looking at it in our office and with Governor Holcomb.
Great, thank you. The next question we have, the cost of college education is disproportionately expensive for Black students nationally, and article is referenced, due in part to the differences in the impact of post-secondary education debt. So to what extent does Indiana track the net worth implications of their apprenticeship programs by race and or ethnicity? If there are differences or racial ethnic groups, for racial or ethnic groups, are there efforts to remediate, or if there's good news to share in the area, to what extent is that story told?
Yeah, I'll jump into our data, and I don't have the information about registered apprenticeships in terms of the outcomes on that. So I would I'll look into see what we were able to obtain. I don't know what we would have, but if you go to the commission's website, I know we referred you to like 8 websites so far, so I apologize for that. But if you go to our website, we are very data heavy in terms of outcomes and results, just because of as was said, the question around the ROI of post-secondary education. To start off with that, we have an equity report that disaggregates the outcomes and across the education pipeline by race, ethnicity, gender, socioeconomic status, and location, so rural, urban, suburban, and it outlines what that looks like. And I would encourage all of you to look at that report as well. So we do track those outcomes. We also, on our college value report, track the return on investment. So we look at debt, income 1, 3, 5 years out. And we have a dashboard right now that you can look and see the various majors at each institution by year, what the graduates earn, and you can look at debt levels and items like that as well. So We do track this information extensively. I don't have the registered apprenticeship information, but I will look at that. The one other thing I do want to say about college costs, and I don't want to dive too far down that rabbit hole, but here in Indiana, we are first in the Midwest and fourth in the nation in need-based financial aid. So when you look at the opportunity to defer a cost for students, Indiana is a leader in that through either the 21st Century Scholarship, the Workforce Ready Grant, the Frank O'Bannon Grant, or our third largest program, which is called the Child of Disabled Veterans Program here in the state, that provides tuition-free education to children of veterans who have some sort of service-connected disability. So anyone who is looking for a post-secondary education here in Indiana has an opportunity to find funding for that. And you can go to the commission's website. There I go again, referring to the website. But you can go and find opportunities about that, or I can connect afterwards with anyone who has questions.
Josh, do you want to talk real briefly about what you're seeing with the 21st Century Scholar Program and helping combat those equity gaps that we see?
Yeah, so for the 21st Century Scholarship, there are no silver bullets for equity gaps or for attainment gaps or achievement gaps here across the state. But the closest thing that we have right now is the 21st Century Scholarship. And if you're not aware of that program, it's been around for now 31 years, and it provides up to full tuition and fees at a public institution and a different amount of private or proprietary for students who enroll in 7th or 8th grade who are eligible for free and reduced lunch. These individuals have to complete certain tasks throughout high school, as well as remain, not get in trouble with the law, live up to the Scholar Pledge. But what we've seen for those who participate and complete the program, we see higher post-secondary enrollment rates, higher post-secondary persistence rates, higher post-secondary graduation rates. What we really need help with is enrolling individuals into the program. So we are seeing the need for more 7th and 8th graders to enroll and understand, as I said from the beginning, that this isn't just a program for a 4-year degree. This is also a program for the short-term certificate for a 2-year program. And it is a national leading program that we hope more students will take advantage of, and that more schools, if they need assistance from us, will reach out and we can help get those students enrolled.
Hey, PJ, can I just chime
Yeah.
in that? I think the program's amazing. I have a couple friends from high school that went through it. The one thing I will say is that, in order to get our students into those types of programs, we just have to be really mindful. And I'm specifically speaking on Black and brown boys right now, that the research shows, and if you want to see me afterwards, I have some books that you can read on this, but they tend to disengage in the education process around 2nd or 3rd grade. And so once they've disengaged from that process, we don't even get to get them at that 21st century scholar level. So what I tell people is that, Dr. Jenner and her team are doing some amazing work in the pre-K through 12 space to really look at student engagement, look at making sure our educators they have cultural fluency so that they know how to interact with all types of students. But that is one of the most critical ages that we really have to be mindful of with our Black and brown boys, because once they disengage from that, they become engaged in something. And it's usually stuff that's not good, that looks at how we start to see the violence rise and participation with drugs. So we really have to be mindful as employers, as people that are part of our communities, that 2nd, 3rd grade level is really crucial. And we have to really support the Department of Education and all of our educators across the state as we try to drive resources to keep those students engaged so that we can get them into those 21st century scholar programs. And then suddenly, we don't have a school to prison pipeline, we have a school to higher education or school to workforce pipeline. And that is really critical, especially for the Black and brown community. So I just wanted to highlight that piece.
Thanks for that, Karrah. Any other questions from the crowd before we move on here?
You mentioned that it would be great to get more people enrolled, and it's one of our greatest challenges with 21st Century Scholar Program. And I've read that there's thoughts about being able to provide like the 21st Century Scholar Program access to IRS information so that it's easier to basically flag families that could potentially participate. Is that just rumor, or is there an opportunity in the future to almost enable push button enrollment as someone submitting their taxes? Whether or not the students, follow up and do all the requirements, that's another story, but at least be able to identify them and notify them that the opportunity is in front of them.
Yeah, so they're not going to let me scrub everybody's tax records to find eligible people across the state. But what we do verify against tax records. So what we are doing to identify who is eligible out there, we get information about free and reduced lunch students across the state. So if we take a specific middle school, we can see who is eligible for free and reduced lunch and provide a counselor with, and the counselor should know this, but a roster of here are all the individuals who are eligible for free and reduced lunch at your school in 7th or 8th grade. Here are all the individuals who are already eligible or who are already um, uh, enrolled in the 21st Century Scholars. Here's who you can target. They need to go in and complete that application. The parent needs to come in as well. So we do have that out there. It would be great if we could get to a point, like you said, where we could just flip the switch and say you're enrolled. But with that, we also want to make sure the students are taking an active step in being part of the program. That this is not this is an earned benefit, and the students who are participating need to make sure they understand what they're doing and that they're taking the steps needed to be prepared for post-secondary.
So I agree completely. And, I do think your point about ensuring that the students are taking the responsibility to complete the program is key. But oftentimes I think there's a hurdle for parents to step back and say, oh, what do I have to do? This might be too good to be true. The number of times I've heard that it's just staggering. So all the easier we make it, I think it would just facilitate, the messaging and the communication to the parents to say, it isn't, a dream. This is the lottery. You just won the lottery. Invest in your kids. Make sure that they know that they can take advantage of this opportunity if they just stick to the program.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I started out as an outreach coordinator for the 21st Century Scholars Program, and the number of individuals who, when I tried to sign them up, would accuse me of just trying to send them a credit card offer or something. I'm like, you got to be kidding me! Like, you just passed up on 4 years of this. But it was working with them to get them to understand that. But yeah, that too good to be true opportunity is what we hear. So if you know of anybody in your area that might be eligible, I would encourage them to go. We've tried to make it as easy as possible. We do have to meet minimum requirements, though. So there are some steps that do need to be taken.
Awesome. I do want to do one plug. I know earlier it was asked of Leighton if they were going to take that kind of guide that they'd put together and make a Spanish version. We last year, for the first time, put together a career guide at the state level that kind of walks everyone through what are graduation pathways, what does CTE really look like, what opportunities are available through CTE. We are updating that guide right now, and there will be, once we finalize that updated Spanish version available. Brandon will know how to get a hold of something like that. So if that's something of interest for the group to share out, it'll have all of our pathways in it, what potential job opportunities exist through the pathway, and also highlights apprenticeship as a viable post-secondary option. So just wanted to give that plug.
Yeah, just quick question. We touched on this topic during the last panel, and I just wanted to get your insight as well. The kind of the cyclical nature sometimes of apprenticeship programs with companies where they'll start it up and then they'll come on tough times and then it kind of goes away. Having experienced that as a co-op myself 30 years ago, and then also with an employer just recently where we built a program up, had 20 people, and then COVID hit and we cut it down to 3. I'm just wondering if your agencies are doing anything or if you've got any ideas how to address that issue, because that can kind of throw cold water on an apprenticeship program, obviously, or the students involved in it if they're brought on and then cut, not too long afterwards.
And Darrell, that's all you, I think.
Yeah, my gears are turning, right? There's no easy answer to that. I think anytime you do any of these, and we keep, and I've used the word multiple times here, they are comprehensive programs. They're comprehensive in nature. They're not real easy, right, to do, but they do have to become a part of, if we're looking at it from a company perspective, it's got to be part of the culture. So when we heard from the last panel that, hey, I don't have the time, or correctly saying I'm not taking the time, you have to do that. I mean, we did as well. It's, when I joined the aerospace firm I was with, it was to really grow the company. And when you get to a point where I can barely get enough widgets out the back door on a daily basis because of how many people I don't have, it becomes that human capital issue. So the change was then from growing the business to growing our human capital. And how do we do that? And, again, you've got to just take it and dive into that and say, I have to do that. This is a function of business. It's like any other capital that you're investing in, the human capital piece, you have to do that. Now, doing it during COVID and having that kind of change, I mean, you couldn't have made that up, right? So building these, as I hinted at earlier as well, you've got a single pipeline, but create different pathways into that, because that does allow a company to be able to turn certain ones on and off, or speed them up, slow them down as time goes on. That takes some time to build. But again, once you do that, here's a company person testifying, once you get this thing taken care of, it is a huge difference. I mean, that is not a piece that you're going to have to really worry about much in the future. So,
Yeah, I think that's the key, is how do you institutionalize it in the culture of the companies that you engage with? Anything that you can do to try to encourage that is really going to make the program take off.
and I think reaching out to people, there's a lot of help obviously right here. Okay, not every region, every local economy has all of this, but they've got a lot of it. So I think reaching out to that, and then sometimes depending on what the company's capabilities are, again, hiring somebody from the outside to come in and do those things. Sometimes we're our own barrier, right? In trying to come up with how to do this, or you make it just way too complex, or don't take the time, have the time. Sometimes it's reaching out to get somebody else's perspective on that really helps.
Well, thank you guys for having us.
Great job, PJ.